For me to be introducing our guest today, Henry Cisneros. And I can't give the introduction that Henry's accomplishments and contributions warrants, because that would too much eat into the limited time that we have together. I don't want to do that. So let me just highlight a couple of things. First of all, he's been a great leader in the political realm at multiple levels. He started as a city councilman at age 27 in San Antonio, and then as mayor of San Antonio at age 33. Think about that. And it's something that we can take for granted now, that a young Latino could be the mayor of a major city, right? There are a few examples of that. But at the time, Henry was the first. So that was a very significant accomplishment. At the national level, as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and an advisor, senior advisor to President Clinton. And what's important about those roles is not that he had them. And this I think is really important about leadership. Some people are in it to have these jobs, and other people are in it to do something with that, to make a contribution with that. And that's what Henry did. And he got so many accolades for being such a successful mayor and such a successful secretary of HUD. And it's really important to focus on the causes that he championed. Economic revitalization, affordable, accessible housing for people, impoverished and minority communities. So these are some of the causes he devoted himself to in his public sector work. In the business world, he is currently the executive chairman of CityView, which focuses again on affordable residential housing. And previously, he was the president of Univision. So we're giving you two Univision presidents in 1 week. That's pretty good. Many, many accolades there, and then his civic service is also very noteworthy. I hope he says something about the New America Alliance, which is an important Latino organization that he co-founded, and it's had increasing influence over the years. So Henry understands and is experienced in leadership in all three sectors, and I hope can speak to that. I know that 6 of you at least will be very proud to know that he's an alumnus of Texas A&M. And of course, we're proud of the fact that he's an alumnus of the Kennedy School. So with that in mind, welcome back, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for your kind introduction and for the invitation. More importantly, thank you for the good work you do. One of the great things about a program like this is you have access to people like Andy Zelleke, who teaches on the faculty here, and you're getting in 1 short week the value of a lifetime of career preparation in teaching negotiations. For example, I noticed in the program for the week that one of the sessions you have is some principles of negotiation. Very, very important. Very few people know how to do that well. And if you get an introduction that whets your appetite and you begin to read the materials and so forth in the field of negotiations, that would be in and of itself a great accomplishment this week. So Andy, thank you very much. Donna, thank you for your leadership of the Center for Public Leadership here at Harvard. I am very proud of my association with the Kennedy School. When I came here, it was before we had this complex of buildings. We were at another building up the street called the Littauer Center. But over the years, I've had the privilege of speaking here on a number of occasions, and always try to be positive in my responses when asked to come back here, because it brings not only so many memories, but I think it's such an important institution in the country. Over the years that I've served in Washington in various times in various capacities, Kennedy School people are all over Washington and other leadership sectors of our country. So the Kennedy School is a very, very special place. And Dario, who I don't believe is in the room now, I think he's doing an interview right this second. Dario, thank you very much. Dario is the person who called me. And speaking of the arts of negotiation and persuasion, I was in the hot sun in San Antonio on a cell phone, and the only way I could get off the phone was to say, yes, okay. Very, very persuasive. Thank you, Dario, for your work in putting this together. And let me just say how envious I am of you and your state in life, and I say this very sincerely, and your opportunity to participate in a program like this. I hope that you take advantage every time you have the opportunity of participating in a summer program like this, or in a internship that leads and that strengthens your insight into the career direction that you may be going, that you take advantage of it. I had the great good fortune at a number of points in my life of participating in things that literally changed my life. When I was a student at A&M, I was invited to a conference at West Point on national security. I was a junior, had never been on an airplane, and had never been out of Texas, and ended up at the request of the student union leader, director at A&M, of spending an extra 4 or 5 days in New York when John Lindsay was the mayor of New York, and the city, this is 1966, 67, when the cities in the United States were burning, the great urban crisis was being recognized. And that trip and that conference had a lot to do with the work that I do and have done over my career, because it just put me in the center of national issues at a time when I was in my own 19-year-old mind figuring out, what I wanted to do. Later, I had the opportunity to accept an internship literally on graduation. I finished college on a Saturday, and Monday I went to work as an assistant to the city manager in San Antonio, and learned a lot about city government there, but had no idea that it would propel me eventually to a city council position in that same city, and eventually to mayor. But it started with being a kind of a junior gopher in the city manager's office 2 days after I graduated from college. And I guess for me, the highest of those internship training opportunities was being selected a White House Fellow at age 23. This is a program, some of you may know of it, where about 15 persons or so are selected every year to serve as an assistant to a cabinet officer or in the White House. A very, very difficult program. It used to be ages 23 to 35. I think they've taken the 35 and made it a little older, and now they're selecting people older. But there were 2 of us in my class that were in the bottom range of the age possible at 23. I served as an assistant to the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Elliot Richardson, who was one of the great heroes of that period. Later, he was involved in what was called the Saturday Night Massacre, because he refused to fire the special prosecutor as Attorney General who was investigating President Nixon, and Nixon fired him. So he ended up being a major national hero. But I had the opportunity to travel with him and learn from him and pick his brain and sit in meetings and watch his management style at 23, 24 years of age, including in that program some travel. We traveled to Africa for about a 10-day period, to the Far East for about a 10-day period. So I'm a great fan of programs where young people sort of immerse themselves and like you're doing, a week here of intense study. I hope you take it seriously. Don't think of it cynically in any way, shape, or form, but just, leave your skepticism at the door and come in and just throw yourself into it and learn absolutely everything. Every word is precious. Every minute is precious. And you'll only appreciate this more as the years go by. And then when internship opportunities present themselves, that give you, the opportunity to learn from doing, to learn from watching other people with experience do. That's hugely important. Not only will it build your record, so that you have some experience on your record when you apply for positions later. Not only will it add substantive knowledge, you will gain substantive knowledge from the things that are taught here and that you see on internships, but you will gain perspective. As I say, as a young man from the west side of San Antonio, Mexicano from the west side of San Antonio, poor neighborhood, the perspective that you gain on how you kind of measure up, on how you relate to larger processes. I mean, to watch Elliot Richardson even run a meeting, to figure out how he scheduled his day, to figure out what he did in his off hours. I mean, how he exercised in the morning before coming to work, took a briefcase with him home at the end of the day, worked for a few hours after leaving at 7 in the evening. I mean, gave you a feel for the length of the day, you know, literally how hard you have to work, how long you have to work. You don't know those things until you see somebody else and you say, well, that's kind of the norm in Washington. People work kind of 8 to 7 or so, and then a few hours more, or a social event in the evening that is work-related, and push themselves very hard. If you don't, it's almost like an athlete. Unless you test yourself against the other athletes, you don't know your capabilities, and you don't know what's expected, and you don't know how hard you have to train. And all of that comes from gaining perspective. As well, very importantly, as networking. I suspect that many of you in this room will make friends from other parts of the country and stay in touch. And I hope you will see the same names of people in the years to come. You will see them in a law school class, or you will see them in a national organization of Latino leaders, or you will see them in a workplace, or you will hear about them for an honor they receive, or whatever. But over the years, literally the friends that I have across the country number in the hundreds of people who I have crossed paths with in sessions of this nature. So for all of those reasons, just to start this off, I want to encourage you to make the most of not only this, but then leverage this accomplishment into others that present themselves, and put yourself in a position to know about more, learn about more, apply for more, and participate in more. Well, the task that's been assigned me is to talk to you a little bit about leadership. That's a hard thing to do. I'm not a believer in talking a lot about leadership, because in my experience, there are too many people who call themselves leaders who are not. There are too many people who call themselves leaders who are really self-promoters. And almost by definition, if you call yourself a leader, you're not. Because it violates the sense, in my judgment, that people who call themselves leaders are not humble enough to be trustworthy leaders, in my book. But that's just my take. It may be completely the opposite of what's taught here at the center. If so, I apologize. But I will share some thoughts with you on what I think are dimensions or principles, if you will, of leadership that I have observed in people whom I respect over the years. And by the way, let me recognize a bona fide leader in business and in civic life, Farouk Shami. Thank you very much for your good work over the last year. He's worked in very serious businesses and made some massive philanthropic contributions and offered himself for public service. And while he didn't win the governorship of Texas this year, he will win something one of these years, I'm sure.
How many friendship?
So let me just kind of go through a number of points here. I'm going to go through kind of like 5 points that I have associated with leadership, and then I would offer in the sense of kind of counsel, if you will, or advice. The first is this: whatever field you want to make your career in, you should prepare yourself to the highest levels of excellence. Because generally speaking, as I have seen, leaders are people who others respect for what they accomplish in their basic field. It's very hard to be a leader in science if you're not one of the better scientists. It's very hard to be a leader in the law if you're not an excellent intellectual and, persuasive legal figure. It's very difficult to be a leader in politics if you're not one of the better in terms of articulation, persuasion, vision, etc. So anybody who thinks there's a shortcut by shortcutting either the educational preparation, the technical preparation, the professional preparation, and somehow wants to be a leader without that is kind of kidding themselves. Because everybody knows who's good among their peers. Okay? So you just have to work very, very hard. Generally speaking, I have found leaders are the people who work the hardest. They're not necessarily, and you all know these folks from high school and college, the wittiest, the prettiest, the most articulate, the most creative. Those are, generally speaking, those traits do not automatically connote leadership. those fade. Those are brilliant for a second. They're the shooting star that flies across the sky, and you say, well, it was there, I think, but I'm not sure, versus the sort of constancy of hard work. Absolutely nothing that adds up like mastery of technical knowledge through just accumulative knowledge and accumulative information. And the rules of the society are not going to change just because Latinos have arrived and we say we are due leadership. People still want to know, well, who can actually get it done? Who can we trust with the workings of the society, whether they be economics and investment banking and public finance, or whether it be administration and of government, or whether it be the arts and artistic and creative endeavors. The rules of society are not going to change just because we're numerous, okay? And I would argue that the reason that Barack Obama was elected is principally because people, yes, they liked his personality and they liked his temperament and they liked his persona and profile, but fundamentally they saw a very smart person who had mastered constitutional law and performed well in his public service. And I think it's clear from his work as president that he's just exceedingly well prepared. And so that's point number one. Point number two, and this is really a difficult one because this doesn't come naturally. Some people have it, some people don't. I think you can educate yourself. I think you can expand your horizons, but it has to do with a sense of mission or a sense of vision. Has to do with a large appreciation for the larger causes. I once heard the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta say, associate yourself with causes that are bigger than yourself and with things that last beyond your time. And I think leaders, real leaders, have a aura, if you will, an appreciation, an internalization of things that have to do with the greater good. Because otherwise, there's a sense of kind of self-promotion, but people can tell what people's fundamental motives are. And I think the bona fide leaders, and I'm going to just draw a distinction between leaders and managers in a moment, but are leaders and administrators or leaders and bosses, but leaders like a Martin Luther King have some inherent sense or developed sense. You can study it. You can study the writings of philosophers and the spiritual studies and the understandings of humanity and so forth to develop a larger vision. Right? And with that comes a sense of integrity and honesty. Yes, it's important to have personal honesty and personal relationships and so forth, but the kind of honesty I'm talking about here is an honesty to a cause. You will not sell out a cause. There are lines you will not cross. There are beliefs about what you want to accomplish that you will not sell out. And I think it's the difference between people who are users, who like leadership because it's kind of a ladder of kind of rising and eventual glory, or people who don't really need the glory, but what they really do need is to advance the cause. And even some of those folks who are not perceived to be leaders while they're in the number 2 position or working behind the scenes, eventually are recognized as leaders because their constancy to a cause, to a mission, to a vision is so complete. So that's a second thing that I think characterizes, leaders. And I think in our Latino community we need more of that kind of leadership that's really committed to the advancement of our people and not just using the fact that there's a wave coming to ride the wave. Right? The third point that I would make is, and it's related to this, is a kind of selflessness that is committed to the well-being of one's followers. My own understandings and learnings about this aspect of leadership come from having served in the United States Army infantry, where the fundamental lessons are, you have to take care of your people first and foremost, even to the detriment of your own security. If you're an officer of an Army platoon and your people get pinned down and someone is shot, you will not leave that person. You will not. The Marines have a principle that says we simply will not leave a man, even a person who's been killed, behind. And it kind of exemplifies the notion of the selflessness of leadership. It's not about the perks. It's not about the adulation. I meet a lot of people who are in leadership for those things. But I really think, until you've kind of mastered the idea of how selfless one is willing to be in order that others can advance. And that's a very, very hard thing, by the way. Very hard thing, because people are not always pleasant, and you don't always like people. But over the years, what I have noted is leaders tend to be the people who genuinely have positive beliefs about other people. Richard Nixon, it was said, just didn't like other people, didn't like people. That's a hard thing, to want to be a leader, President of the United States, and not actually like other people. He had a very hard time in social conversation, awkwardness, very hard time in making small talk, because fundamentally he didn't like other people. I learned in the years that I was mayor of San Antonio that the only way I was going to get through that job was to find the good in every person and every exchange, in every social exchange. Other people had stories to tell, they had accomplishments, no matter, I have never met a person, never met a single human being who I didn't think had something interesting, noteworthy, admirable, to share. Even if it's a criminal, you can learn from their criminal background something about the way humanity works. But every single human being has a uniqueness, a dimension, and somehow you have to kind of think about that in the collective as well. Not just individuals, but people together. Because if we approach people cynically, if we approach human beings somehow as just cogs to be used on our way to leadership, they're the rug we step over en route to something bigger, it'll catch up. It'll catch up. Those attitudes in the final analysis will show, and they will be transparent, and they will be seen. Which leads me, I said earlier, to a distinction between the art of management or administration and leadership. That's kind of well established in the leadership literature. There's a man named James McGregor Burns wrote a book called Leadership, big fat book, about 600 pages, in which the core of it was the distinction between what he called transactional leadership and transformational leadership. Some of you may have already been exposed to this concept. But transactional leadership, as he described it, is a kind of belief between the leader and the public that we have a deal. I will do for you, you will do for me. You will give me votes, I will give you results, right? And that's interesting. I mean, that certainly is a way to approach it. But his view of a higher order leadership was what he called transformational leadership, where the leader is actually attempting to advance either an idea or, more importantly, improve people's lives, improve people even, right? By conveying something bigger, some kind of spiritual or transformational dimension that actually makes people better, in the process. So that is a difference that I have always used or thought of as the difference between people who are good administrators. I mean, they've mastered the mechanics of administration, business administration, public administration. They know how to move the paper, they know how to communicate, they know all the tricks, right? But they're not conveying a sense of self-improvement for other people or conveying, lessons that make people bigger and larger. That's three so far. I've talked about technical competence, a sense of mission and vision, a sense of selflessness. The fourth point I would make is the importance of being able to communicate all of that. Because there are people who have all that sense, but they just can't communicate it. So it's very important, and I notice you're spending some time at this week, on the arts of communication. As Latinos, I think it's important that you master Spanish as well as English. And that's a kind of an increasingly lost art among younger Latinos who grow up in English settings and who don't have time to practice. Very difficult to communicate with the poor among our community, the recent arrivals, without being able to speak in Spanish. And while it's not fatal for sure, I know several Latino leaders of major responsibilities, mayors and others who really have not bothered to learn articulate Spanish. I think it is important if you want to communicate from the heart, you know, in the native language of our own community. So I would just put that as one. But equally importantly is finding the way to communicate beyond academic language, beyond code words, beyond jargon, to language that touches people and language that moves people, with stories and personal anecdotes and the language that leaders have to employ. I think one other dimension of language in your time will be the ability to speak both to the Latino community and to the larger American community. Because we are now at a stage as Latinos, just in terms of the size of our population, where we are now critically important to the future of the United States. Other countries like Japan and France and Italy are actually beginning to decline in population. The United States will not have that problem. We're going to be a growing country. That's a good thing. I know there are environmentalists and others who think it's not so good, the carrying capacity of the country, all of that. But we are in a free market economy that requires a growing population with growing markets to succeed. Right? It's the only economics we know, right? And one of the fundamental dynamics is going to be the growth of the Latino population. This country is blessed that it has this population that is hardworking, self-sacrificing, future-oriented, family-oriented, religiously based, etc., as its largest immigrant group. But the country needs to understand that this is a good thing, and we need people who can articulate it in language that doesn't frighten, doesn't alarm, but explains why this is so important for our country. And there's some very, very tough battles ahead. Arizona is just the beginning, because as our population grows, people become afraid. As we become larger, we become more of a threat. And in some sense, your generation is going to have a tougher challenge than even the generations that came before. Now, that's saying a lot, because some of the leadership figures on whose shoulders we stand really had to suffer a lot in times of overt discrimination and hateful discrimination, even physical pain, right? And yet, the challenges ahead are even more profound for the country, for the future of the country. So finding the language is so critical. And so the gifts of communication are ones that need to be honed and prepared. Finally, I would say, with respect to these kind of dimensions of leadership, leaders do have to have certain techniques, if you will, in order to lead. And one of those, for example, that's related to kind of keeping your word is being able to remember what you told people and being able to fulfill. And that's, I mean, it sounds funny, but you know, when you're drinking water from a fire hydrant and you're getting requests and making commitments and kind of negotiating on the run all day long, you have to have ways to get back to people. You have to have ways to log and remember and list and so forth. I have a kind of a series of, in my business as well as in civic things, a kind of series of goals that I have set out of things that I want to accomplish. And those are kind of their larger, bigger kind of picture, maybe year-long kind of commitments. Every Sunday night, I spend about an hour and review those in the context of what I can do in the week ahead, what I can do in the week before me. I discovered this when I was mayor. Sometimes Friday would arrive, and I felt like I had a very busy week. There was a good reason why I was exhausted, but it was mostly busyness. And it was mostly things like attending meetings and presentations and the things you have to do. But I hadn't advanced the ball. At the end of the day, there would be nothing to show for it. At the end of a year, say, there would be nothing to show in terms of substantive progress. So I began on Sunday evenings to sort of lay out the way I wanted to use my time. And even if time was scarce, what I would force onto the calendar of the things that I needed to advance. Whether it was a new library we were trying to build, or something to do with advancing an initiative at the police department, or an aviation-related thing at our airport, or an international matter, or a Washington-related initiative, whatever it was, so that on Monday morning I could sit down with the staff and say, let's look at the calendar for the week and see what we can plug in. On Thursday afternoon, there's an hour, let's use that hour to do this. Call these people in so we can work on this issue. Or Tuesday late, looks like the day is full, but at 6 p.m., let's see if we can get X number of people in and work on this problem. So that at the end of the week, you advance the ball and you can measure it a little bit better. Then, it's important to sort of do that almost on a daily basis as well. And because, you know, it's so important to get back to people. Whether you're in business or whether you're in government, it's rude, not to be able to get back to people. It's rude to tell people you'll do something and then not do it. And very few of us have the capacity to just remember all of those commitments from our head. So the point I'm making is there are techniques that you will learn. Things that work for you, they're different for other people, right? But, they're important. I heard a television advertisement once that kind of stayed with me. It was an insurance advertisement, and this insurance man said, if you call me, I'll get back to you. And if I haven't gotten back to you by tomorrow, it probably means I died. Because otherwise, I will get back to you. The point is, you got to follow up. You have to meet your commitments. You've got to be good for your word. And by the way, in politics, that's a very, very difficult thing, because people from different sides are always asking you for a commitment on both sides of a question, and it's very difficult to know exactly what to tell them and to know exactly how to follow up on that, and you just have to have ways to be able to sort your way through it. Well, let me close and take questions by, we're going to quit around a little after 1 or so, so we've got 20 minutes or so that we can talk. But you're coming into leadership opportunities. And I use those words advisedly because some of you will be leaders and some of you will not. Some of you are going to be professionals in your own right. Some of you are going to be influential, but not necessarily leaders. And others of you are going to be acknowledged leaders. And all of that will sort itself out depending on the way life breaks, on the way you work and the way you prepare and the mastery of a field and your integrity and sincerity in the way you address other people. And I can't know that. You will have to decide that, and the way you interface with life and the circumstances it presents you will decide that. But I would say you're coming into a magnificent time when the Latino community is growing dramatically. We're going to be half of the growth in the entire United States over the next 40 years. We have more opportunities for leadership. In an earlier period, people fought each other harder than they fought for our progress because the opportunities for leadership were few. So, and we had this kind of patron sense that, whoever was the leader was the absolute top dog, and people fought for that top of the pyramid because there were only a few pyramids. But now, we're going to have Latino leaders in every field of American life. In politics, at all levels, governors, senators, in due course, there will be a president of the United States who is Latino or Latina. I don't know whether that person is already born. I think so. I don't know whether that person is in kindergarten or in elementary school or in law school or already serving in a junior office, some state legislator somewhere, I don't know. But I believe that person is born. And, you know, the Barack Obama of the Latino community, or Latina, is out there, you know, maybe in this room. And I think we're going to need leaders who lead museums, foundations, churches, universities, businesses, consulting groups, civic organizations, local governments, Fortune 500 companies, international companies, you name it. Lots and lots and lots of opportunities for leadership. And I think our leadership is going to be manifest in the cultural environment as well, in movies and music and new forms of media, and it's an exciting time. And many of the barriers that existed before have fallen, and now it's just a matter of who's good, who's really good. Who's good not only in the context of our own community, but whose art and whose skills and whose persuasion and whose leadership is acceptable to the larger national community as well. Those opportunities are all there. It's a gorgeous and really marvelous time. And while there be many hardships and the work is hard, we're talking, you know, 16-hour days on end, a marathon, not a sprint. For those of you who are willing to work that hard, both the personal rewards and the leadership rewards are there. Thank you very much for allowing me to come over. 15 minutes or so, I think. Maybe more. I think we said 120, right, Nadia?
120, yes.
120. Okay, so we have plenty of time. Great. Well, my favorite time in a session like this is your questions and the dialogue. And so let's hear your questions, and we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. Yes, sir. We'll start over here.
I'm pretty sure.
Identify yourself, if you would, for my benefit.
Ricardo Saldaña. I
From?
go to the University of Houston. I'm a mechanical engineer.
Okay.
And pretty much everybody has this question: when are you going to run for governor or president?
I think I've had my time in public service. I was a councilman for 6 years. I was a mayor for 8, and I loved being mayor of my hometown. It's a magnificent thing. San Antonio is now a city of about 1.2 million. Back then it was maybe 800,000. But when you grow up in a city and the citizens of that community grant you the privilege of being their mayor, and you do it for 4 terms, it really is you become kind of at one with the place, and so it was a great experience. Then the president asked me to serve in the cabinet, which I did for 4 years, and I got to learn the country in not quite the same depth, but in a similar way that I did learn San Antonio. I visited over 200 different American cities, some of them as many as 20 times, Atlanta, Philadelphia, where we had a lot of issues and things I had to work on. In every single one of the 50 states, you know, my beat was the poorest of the poor: homeless, public housing, home ownership issues, community development in Native American villages in Montana and South Dakota, in Alaskan villages in Nome, Alaska, in the central cities of the hardest hit places, you know, Newark and Cleveland, and smaller towns as well. We had tragedies on our watch, like the Midwestern floods, like the Oklahoma City bombings, like the earthquakes in Los Angeles. So I saw a lot, I love public service, and I love to be at it. But you know, everything has its time. And what I did was create a company in 2000 that focuses on what I enjoyed most about being mayor and about being HUD secretary, which was helping build up communities and helping families move into homes. And I did it so that it's something I can do for the rest of my life. I mean, this is a company that I'm committed to doing as long as I can work, and I'm going to work until my 80s. So we're going to be building this enterprise and building homes for people for a very long time. The thrill of building a community that transforms a neighborhood, and then my favorite experience now in life is on the Saturday morning that we open the communities and do a little speech and welcome the local government officials in and the school officials and the police and so forth. But watch the families who are the first owners, and they literally, on many occasions, they're in tears with the joy of being able to move into the home. So for me, it is everything I could ask for from public service, and it allows me to stay on track and just sort of keep doing this without all of the diversions and digressions and frustrations, you know, that are in public office. So I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I enjoy it, you know, a great deal. Thank you for the question. Yes, ma'am.
We've all been discussing.
State your name.
Oh, sorry. I'm Jackie Miramontes. I'm from Merced, University of California, Merced.
Uh-huh.
We've all been discussing.
You grew up, you're from East Merced and go to UC
Well,
Merced.
I grew up in Merced,
Okay.
and now I attend there.
Got it. Okay.
Um,
That's the newest of the UC
it is.
schools.
We've all been discussing the specific point in our lives which led us to where we are now, why we're here. Was there a specific instance, a person in your life that made you decide this?
Yeah. Well, thank you. You know, it relates to the point I made earlier about some college experiences. I graduated in 1968. Now, I know that sounds to you like 1868. But 1968 was arguably one of the most tumultuous years in modern American life. I heard somebody the other day on television asking on Meet the Press whether the present period was the most difficult period in America since the Depression. And they're just skating right over the 60s because, I mean, you couldn't have walked out on this street without smelling tear gas on the streets during the mobilization against the war in 67 and 68. And that was every major city in the country. Not to mention the riots and burnings in Cleveland, in Detroit, the Watts riots in 65 in Los Angeles, the burning of Washington, D.C. after the assassination of Dr. King. Dr. King was assassinated in March. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in June. I mean, there was a sense the country was coming apart. Literally, the cities were burning in race riots, and the cities were under siege. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on the streets because of the Vietnam War. President Johnson resigned. Bloody riots in Chicago during the Democratic Convention. It was a mess. That's the year that I, quote, came of age. And I concluded that, I had concluded before, I just always assumed that I would be in some kind of public service. Because that's just kind of the family ethic and so forth. But I had thought it meant, you know, I didn't know what it meant exactly. Could mean the State Department, could mean the military, could mean, I didn't know. But that year and that trip to New York and the emergence of some charismatic figures like Mayor Lindsay in New York, who was walking the streets, sleeves rolled up, trying to keep New York from burning the way other cities were burning. And he gets credit. He gets credit for doing it, for pulling it off. Mayor Stokes was elected the first African-American mayor of a major American city, mayor of Cleveland, in that period. It drove home for me that that the area where if I wanted to be in public service, the area that to me could be very exciting and an area of contribution was urban cities. And there are very few people who can say that what they concluded in their college years, right, is what they've done the rest of their life. I had one digression, and that was the period that I was president of Univision from 97 to 2000. But even that was really almost on track because it gave me insights into the Latino community that I'd never had before. I never understood the Cuban diaspora the way I do now, or the Dominican, million people, Dominicans that rebuilding the Bronx in New York, or the New Yorican phenomenon, you know, out of San Juan to New York, and the Salvadorians in LA and Silver Spring, Maryland, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we had 14 stations, Univision had 14 stations across the country, and I had to go to all of those places and spend time, you know, with the local Univision, as Univision is here today covering you from Boston. Maria, thank you very much for being here. Diego, ¿verdad? Gracias. To answer your question specifically, I think it was a convergence of timing and events and a decision that, you know, I wanted to try to be helpful to the country, and I got very excited about the urban agenda, and that's pretty much what I've been doing. From finishing college to going to work in the city of San Antonio, to doing a master's degree in urban and regional planning, to pursuing a doctorate in urban public administration, to becoming a White House fellow with an urban assignment, to coming here to the Kennedy School and studying strictly urban. I came here on a one-year program that ended up being 2 years, and took courses here at the business school, at the School of Education, at the School of International, at MIT, at the Sloan School, all in urban courses, urban economic development, urban labor markets, urban, you know, everything that I could possibly absorb. And then I went home and became a city council member and used it all. And I skated for about 10 years just on what I learned in school that hadn't reached Texas yet. It was a great experience. And then, based on that, ran for mayor, and that kind of vaulted me into a kind of a larger national profile, which got President Clinton's attention, and he put me in his cabinet. So it's kind of, you know, a seamless continuance, if you will, based from those early decisions. Does that answer your question? Sorry. Yeah.
I'm Rafael Maravilla from the University of California, Merced as well.
Merced.
And first I'd like to say thank you for such an inspirational speech. And my question to you is, I'm sure you know that Merced County was one of the largest affected counties with the housing market crisis occurred.
All the Central Valley, Modesto, maybe the worst in America, Stockton.
Yeah, and in that county we have a lot of vacant homes, and we also have a lot of poverty, a lot of families that don't have somewhere to stay, that are getting foreclosed on, that must leave their homes, they have nowhere to go. And what I am thinking is maybe some of us here in collaboration could start an organization where we can work with developers and get these families to be able to purchase these homes at either a discounted rate or at some sort of plan, a mortgage plan. And I would just like to know what suggestions or advice would you be able to offer us if we were to initiate such an endeavor.
Well, I don't know about this group or this organization. I can't speak to that. I don't know who's here, and I don't know, you know, where you're going back to, and all of that. And frankly, I've been with in a lot of Latino organizations where everybody gets sort of hooked on excited by the issue of the moment and pledges to do something, and that's really not the strength of an organization like this. I mean, it's really not possible. So rather than create something that's unachievable and essentially convert it into a deflation because the organization can't produce that, I would focus on what it is here. This is about networking, this is about education, this is about getting all the information that you can, this is about staying in touch over the years, but I wouldn't try to do something operational out of it unless that operational was reconvening from time to time as a group, maybe under the auspices of Harvard, for the purpose of advancing your friendship and your education. That would be very important, I think. The things that I've been associated with in the past, like the White House Fellows, have an ongoing organization beyond the time that you're here. But to your point, somebody needs to be doing. I don't know that it's this group, but somebody needs to be doing the kind of thing that you're talking about, and it's most likely going to be nonprofits at the local level. It's going to be CDCs, community development corporations, that are given funding out of the stimulus funds or a specific other housing monies from their local government for the purpose of buying homes that are in foreclosure, repairing homes that are in foreclosure, and then making them available either as rental or as home ownership opportunities for families that have been displaced or who are coming up. And that's a very important thing that we do because, frankly, it's more than just the stock of housing that is vacant and being destroyed and full of graffiti and so forth. It's really goes right to the heart of the national problem because our economy cannot recover if the housing sector doesn't recover, and the housing sector is not going to recover when there's all these foreclosed homes at discounted prices available, so that builders dare not build because there's something that's available at 60 cents on the dollar down the street, you know, that is vacant. That's the alternative. So you can't build if you can't sell, and you can't sell if something else is creating this overhang of foreclosed property. So it does need to be done. I don't know whether there's any connection back, you know, to this group, to be perfectly frank. Yes, I saw you next.
My name is Marlena Caesar from UMass Boston.
UMass Boston.
Yes, born and raised in Boston. And my question for you is...
UMass Boston is the one over by the library?
Yes, sir. As a Latino, what are some of the challenges with working with public service that you faced, or what would be your advice as a Latino, Latina working in public service?
Well, you know, it depends, I guess, where you are in a way. I mean, I came up in a city where there was a long tradition of Latino public officials, so I was not a first. I was the first to become mayor, but, you know, we had the first Latino congressman, Henry B. Gonzalez, came out of my city, and lots of other public officials. And, you know, I often said that, you know, growing up, I didn't know, you know, overt, you know, discrimination in the sense that we think of it, because I lived in a completely Latino neighborhood, kind of lower middle class. And I have said that it was like a Norman Rockwell painting, except all the faces would be brown. You know, I mean, it was just like this almost. I mean, when I went outside the street from my house and whistled, 16 guys my age were in the 3 blocks. I mean, it's a football game instantly, you know, in the street. I mean, that's the kind of neighborhood that I grew up in. So when as I was coming up, I could have just as easily been Irish in Boston or Polish in Chicago for the network and support system that I had. Now, when I went to confront the larger society, right, and became the first Latino mayor in whatever it was, 150 years or whatever, I didn't even know kind of what I was getting into. But I tried to use the same values and the same network and the same instincts, you know, and they tended to work. You know, if you try to be fair, if you try to be open, if you try to listen, if your instinct is to, you know, kind of listen to all the voices and find the road through it that satisfies the most and brings people together and advances the ball, then it works for everybody. And if you can constantly articulate it, even people who disagree with you can be brought around a lot of times. And if not, at least broaden the middle enough that you marginalize, you know, the edges. So those are strategies that work for me. And frankly, I think they are, as near as I have been able to tell in 35 years or whatever in public service or around public service, those are the essential political skills. To me, the essence of politics is finding the common ground and broadening the common ground, but creating a tension. So you're pushing the right thing and getting the maximum you can, you know, stretching the possibilities, putting tension on the system and pushing for the most you can get without, you know, now sometimes you're just going to have to upset the apple cart. I mean, this Arizona situation is unacceptable. It cannot stand, for example. So I don't care whose eggs get broken on that one, some eggs are gonna have to be broken, because that cannot stand. But for the most part, you try to appeal to people's intelligence and people's reasonableness and people's values. Unfortunately, America is getting more divided, and the public climate is getting uglier. But you can't be afraid of it. You know, we can't be afraid of it. We have to go right into it. I presided over some town hall meetings this summer on healthcare, and it was ugly and unreasonable, but it's combat, and you have to expect it. You have to expect political combat. President Clinton used to say, we can't fault our opponents for using every tool they have available to them. We have to fault ourselves if we don't have the guts to use the same tools and counter them. If we lose, it's not their fault. It's our fault. It's not their fault. It's our fault. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. We just got to do what we're supposed to do. And that's why in Bill Clinton's administration, you never let a news cycle pass without answering. You never, the same kind of meetings that I was telling you that I had as mayor, where I was kind of planning, we had every Wednesday night in the White House in the Clinton administration. Political meeting, to sort of think through the goals. Those are the essential political skills. They don't change. And let me just say, for those of you who are thinking about politics, it's a very honorable profession. Because societies, like every other human enterprise, need leaders. From time immemorial, when we were cave people in caves and somebody had to organize the hunt to go out and kill the saber-toothed tiger so the children could eat, there had to be a leader who said, you take this spear, you take this knife, you carve this rock, and you come from the front and I'll come from the back. Or the other way around, maybe. I'll come from the front and you come from the back. Whatever. The point is, somebody had to organize human activity, right? That's what leaders do. That is the essence of what a leader does, right? And whether it was the Greek polis or, the first Iraqi cities that are now we know in the Valley of the Ur in Iraq, or whether it was, you name it. You name the human enterprise, and there have to be leaders. And it's no different today, right? So the skills of how you organize other human beings and their activities haven't changed that much. You have to communicate to people, you have to explain to people, you have to show them how it's in their interest, you have to show them how you're not taking care of yourself, but you're doing something that they need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hasn't changed. It may be done with emails now and on the web, and radio and all the rest, but the art is the same. Let's see, I saw another question over here. There was one over here I saw out of the corner of my eye. No?
We do one more brief question.
Okay. Well, let's take this young lady, and then Farouk has a question. We'll do that.
Hi, my name is Maria Dixon. I'm also a student at UMass Boston. I was actually born in Mexico and raised in California for many 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
What are suggestions for especially the younger, someone non-traditional learner, a little older, to balance both your passion
Very good point.
and your family, especially as a single mother?
Very, very, very good question. And I should have put it in my list of things that are dimensions of leadership, because it's very difficult to be a leader if you don't have some kind of semblance of balance. Now, a lot of the things I described here sound almost obsessive, the hours of work and the commitment to the goals. But it is. It is. But you have to work hard at striking some kind of balance. And the balances are your physical health, your spiritual health, your family health, extended relationships, friends. So all of those are important. And you have to work at it. When I was mayor, I included my children in as many of the public things I had to do, and though they may not have liked it at the time, I think have been shaped in their lives by some public values, and they appreciate the involvements and the kind of learning that they did even then. If I had to open a library on a Saturday morning, my daughters would go with me, and we'd make a kind of a fun thing out of it, and they remember that even now. But I also, took time off, kind of like entire Sundays to spend with them and go to the park or take them to the lake or teach them to ski or, or things of that nature. Spiritual life, to me, very important. Hard to imagine, in my way of thinking, a sincere leadership that doesn't have a spiritual sense. Now, I'm not saying it needs to be church-going, but that has a spiritual dimension. Because that has so much to do with how we calibrate our psyche for how we deal with other people, right? And what values we set above others and so forth. And, I mean, I always, when I go to, I'm Catholic, and when I go to church, or read scripture, which I do sometimes at church, the homily and the readings and so forth, there's always a lesson or two that relates to the public sphere, and how you deal with other people. That, to me, that's important. And personal health, I try to work out every single day. Don't get it in quite every day. I generally about 25, 26 days a month, but that's just important. I can't function if I don't exercise. And there are many different approaches to that. Some people run, some people do weights, some people do combinations, some people do Pilates, some people do yoga, all kinds of things. But this is, I'm going to say it again, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon leadership. So you have to prepare yourself for the marathon. And that means you have to stay healthy, you have to eat well, you have to sleep well, you have to have some balance in your life. There's some people who think that leadership is burning the candle at both ends and having, being life of the party until 2 in the morning, but they generally don't show up early enough to make much of a difference at the next morning meeting. The people I've admired are the people who kind of understand the marathon quality of it, and build their life. Here's the key phrase: build their life in a balanced way around all of those commitments, right? You're a single mother. Children will appreciate what you're doing, given the opportunity to see it and learn it. And children will appreciate it in due course, and they can take more than you think in terms of, the responsibilities you give them early so that you can be involved in advancing your public service and your career and so forth. And they will appreciate it in the long run. I cannot tell you how many people I know in public life, achievers, who are the products of single mothers and who say, I learned everything I know from my mother and the values and the commitments that she made, the sacrifices she made, and they appreciate it for the rest of their life. So, bringing children in early to a sense of public service is I think, a very important thing, and can actually help you in the balance. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Good.
Last question.
All right. Yes, sir. Shannon.
Okay, sir, first, thank you very much for your leadership. Our border with Mexico is a big challenge. Drugs, violence, unemployment. What is your take and what is your suggestion, the solution?
Well, it's a very, very hard problem. Obviously, we need to enact immigration reform so that we can regularize the flows, okay? Which means border security. A nation that doesn't have borders is not a nation. I mean, think of it. The definition of nationhood is to have a map on the ground, right? And if you have a map on the ground that's got borders, then they're not borders unless you define them as borders. So no one can begrudge the United States for saying we need security at the border, right? But we also have 12 million people in the United States who are undocumented, who we're treating as second-class people, human beings. So we need a guest worker program to deal with those. And then we need a pathway to citizenship so that people who are created as guest workers do not stay in that status, because we never have in the United States had a legal class of second-class citizens. So we need to move people towards citizenship. And that then gives us a standing to, deal with the issues within our borders and begin a dialogue with Mexico. The reality of the relationship with Mexico and immigration is that it is push and pull. It's push and pull. Push-pull in the sense that people are being pushed out of Mexico by inadequate jobs and employment in Mexico. All of those small villages, people have no way to make a living. The only dignified thing they can do is move people out. And pulled by the attraction of jobs within the United States. Right? And that's not going to change because we have a strong economy and we need workers. Right? But we have not spent enough time or worked enough time with Mexico on development within Mexico. And I think, through the NAD Bank and other strategies, we just need to work on things that will grow the Mexican economy. The drug problem is exceedingly serious. Mexico, I think President Calderon is doing the right thing. I know people disagree with that, but civil society in Mexico will not survive if the drug lords have more sway than the government. And so the president has made the decision he's not going to cede a portion of American society, of Mexican society, and say, we'll cede that turf to you. We'll cede these institutions to you. No, they cannot survive. They're going to have to go down. Now that's what's causing all of this problem. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be soon. It's years and years, decades, maybe 100 years of allowing the criminal element to get to the point that it has. But I think Mexico is in a battle for its own soul, for its survival. Its judiciary institutions, its police institutions, the fundamental way of life, whether it's run as a society of laws with any semblance of honesty, or whether there's a wink-wink, those who can buy their way out through the courts do, etc. I think they're in a fight, and they need all the help they can get from us.